Snow fell in heavy, silent sheets the night everything in her life finally broke. She didn't remember the cold anymore, only the weight of the world pressing down on her chest as she sat on the wooden steps of the lodge, her hair and dress coated in frost, her fingers gripped around an old leather bag that held everything she had left. Behind her, towering wooden doors carved with skulls and wings loomed like guardians of a world she didn't belong to. In front of her stood the man people whispered about as though he were a storm, broad-shouldered, tattooed, wrapped in a leather jacket marked with insignias that made most folks cross the street. And at his side were two small children, twins, bundled in wool and innocence, their little hands pointing toward her as though even they sensed something about her that life had forgotten to remind her of. It was in that moment, frozen and fragile, that he uttered the words that would change the course of both their lives. My kids need someone, and you need safety. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps keep stories of hope alive. She had arrived at that cabin after days of running from a man who once promised protection but delivered fear, running from the bruises she tried to hide, running from a life that had taken more from her than she ever had to give. She had no destination, only desperation. When her car broke down in the storm miles back, she just walked, driven by instinct, silently praying for a miracle she didn't believe she deserved. She didn't know she had wandered straight into the territory of the last people she ever thought would help her. The Hell Angels Lodge, a place rumored to be home for people hardened by life, men who built shields from steel and scars. Yet there she was, trembling on their steps, and it wasn't cruelty she had been met with, but two curious toddlers and a man with tired eyes that understood pain, without ever asking for its story. He wasn't the monster townsfolk whispered about. He was something far more complicated, carrying grief that bent his shoulders and a gentle protectiveness that flickered beneath the surface like embers refusing to die out. People called him a lone demon, a rough rider who'd lost his wife years ago and raised his sons with more love than anyone expected, from a man who wore skulls on his back. But even strength has limits, and even warriors feel loneliness. He had been trying to raise the twins alone, fighting night after night to balance survival and fatherhood. The boys adored him, but children needed more than love. They needed warmth, consistency, tenderness, and someone who could soothe the fears he sometimes didn't know how to comfort. So when he saw the woman on the steps, exhausted, frightened, clearly on the edge of collapse, something inside him locked into place. Not pity, not charity, recognition, as though life had set two broken pieces in front of him and asked if he was brave enough to put them together. She didn't answer him right away. Her breath trembled in the frigid air as she tried to process the offer. Not salvation, safety, not obligation, purpose. She looked at the children first, their tiny boots dusted in snow, their innocent eyes waiting, unafraid of her shivering presence. They didn't know her past, they didn't know her failures. They only saw a woman who looked like she needed someone too. And then she looked at the man. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to touch her, didn't crowd her space. He simply stood steady, as though silently promising he would never become another storm in her life. That was what shook her the most. Inside the warm lodge, heat pulsed from old lanterns lining the walls and a fire crackled in a stone hearth big enough to swallow shadows. It felt unreal to her, comfort, calm, a roof that didn't echo with shouting. She sat near the fire while the twins toddled over with blankets and mismatched toys, offering them to her like treasured gifts. She hadn't realized she was crying until one of the boys placed his tiny hand on her knee, patting her like a child who somehow understood what hurt felt like. As hours passed, she told pieces of her story in hesitant fragments, never the worst parts, but enough for him to understand why she flinched at sudden sounds and why the storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside her. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He listened with a stillness that made her feel seen instead of inspected. When she finished, she expected him to ask her to leave, to warn her that she had brought danger to his doorstep. Instead, he told her that the world had taken enough from her already, that she wasn't a burden, she wasn't trouble, and she wasn't alone anymore. Days turned to weeks, and she slowly found herself breathing again. The twins clung to her, not out of dependency but affection. She helped with meals, taught them songs, patched their little jackets, and for the first time in years, she woke up without dread curling in her stomach. The biker lodge, once intimidating, became a sanctuary filled with laughter echoing through hallways that had long forgotten joy. Even the roughest members softened when the boys ran into the room, and they treated her not as an outsider but as someone who had earned a place among them. And the man, he never rushed her healing. He gave her space, respect, and gentle moments of understanding that slowly unraveled the fear inside her. Sometimes they spoke for hours after the boys were asleep, sharing stories under the soft glow of lantern light. Other times they simply existed in the same silence, finding peace in knowing neither had to be strong every moment of the day. But the real turning point came one night when the twins were sick with fever. She stayed awake beside their beds, wiping foreheads, whispering comfort, holding little hands through the trembling. When dawn finally broke, and the boys rested peacefully, she found the man watching her with a look she couldn't decipher. Something between gratitude and awe. It was then she realized she had become something she didn't expect. Necessary. Not because he needed help, but because the boys had chosen her, and perhaps he had quietly begun to choose her too. If this story touched your heart in any way, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support truly keeps these stories alive. Before the story ends, comment below, everyone deserves a second chance. In the end, she stayed not because she needed shelter, but because she found a family in the most unlikely place. A family forged from brokenness, rebuilt through tenderness, and strengthened by the simple truth that sometimes the people we fear the most are the ones capable of the greatest compassion. And as snow fell softly outside the lodge once more, she finally understood the weight of the words he spoke the night they met. His kids needed someone. She needed safety. But what none of them expected was that what they truly needed was each other.